Yo, 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 what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy B, and today we are going to be announcing, or I guess publicizing, some of our group predictions that we think might end up playing out. Now, I should state this for the obvious, but there are a number of factors that go into how the COD team does matchmaking, especially for Rise of the Dragon versus War of the Last Snows. And the process that they utilize is it's not to say that it changes drastically, but you have to understand that with ROTD there is no team up phase. With War of the Last Snows, there is a team up phase. So we're going to break that down, and then we're going to show you our sheet. Also, for those of you that are interested in how you can access the sheet, we'll talk about that, and then we'll get into our group predictions. As always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you throw us up, because that was a lot. Thanks. So number one, what are these differences and how do they factor into KvK matchmaking? So for, again, War of the Last Snows, because you're doing a team up phase, the difference here is that the system is trying to pair teams together, that the individual kings and queens are deciding on who they want to work with. So you could arguably, again, this is why they had the Paragon system, to essentially try and eliminate having, for example, the top 4 kingdoms just team up together. And that's why they did the classification system by having the A, B, C, D seeds. Again, there probably should have been some more seeds, more letters that they put in there. I think that would have been one way to potentially address it. And or making just because the idea being is, you had really wide gaps, right? And let me show you an example of really what I'm talking about here. So one of the biggest problems that you saw when it came to War of the Last Snows and even previous seasons that have had team up phases is that you have a range here of basically 30.5 billion, right, in all your A seeds, all the way down to 14 billion. So you have about 31 to 14. That's around 16.5, 17 billion power range for what you would consider an A seed. On top of which, you had some kingdoms that were high Bs that were stronger than some As. Now, to me, that obviously makes absolutely no sense, right? You should be having, if you're using power as a primary metric along with other secondaries, and or if you have multiple primaries, then it's just it doesn't really, to me, kind of equal out. And a great example of this is, right, you look at some of the numbers here and you could see, just as one example, right? Look at this from basically 80 mil plus beyond. And let's hang on, let me skadoosh myself back up here. So if you're looking at 17, right, which I think is one observation, yes, they're 17.7 and they're 14 billion power here. But if you look at, let me raise this up a little higher so it's easier to see. But if you just compare, right, 80 million plus and above, you can see here that the 14 billion in RNW, keep in mind this was, taken 2 months ago on the data pool, but you could see they have more 80 million plus, they have more 100 million plus, they have more 125, more 150, more 200. So you can also gauge, right, that there is some value that's being put on T5, right? On the number of T5 players, on the amount of total troops trained. There are other factors, like, for example, one, spending capability, right? That's something they obviously have access to on the back end because they can see how much everyone spends, total money spent, average KvK money spent, average weekly spend, monthly spend. I mean, it would be ridiculous if they didn't have access to that information. So there are other factors that go in as well. I just wanted to kind of give you guys an example of how, like, the team up phase is a little bit different. Now, as we talk about, so in the team up phase, right, people are teaming, but then you're pairing people based on the teams, on the existing teams. The difference here for ROTD is that similarly, and I'll show you this sheet from the ROTD season, here's just one example of you seeing the top teams, right? So you basically had the top teams here. So it's RAC, SSG, EAS, BTX, Echo, RFF, right? So lowest team here was what, 22.9? If we go to the second team, you could see ROG, which was 24.5. They were the only one that could have maybe played in the number 1 KvK, so there was like a 1 swap. But for the most part, it pretty much goes in order of kingdom power. Now, kingdom power is determined by all accounts on the map by the time registration ends, regardless of power. This is what the CoD team has stated until something has been updated or stated otherwise, and or if they change it going forward. So you could basically have, like my 7,000, 8,000 powered scout account would basically count towards the kingdom power in this case. So, right, as long as I'm logged in and that account doesn't disappear, that city doesn't disappear from the map, right, once registration closes. So, with that out of the way, that is pretty much how it's worked. This is the sheet we showed you yesterday and the day before of everything compiled from the majority of this. About 95% of this data was compiled on the 30th of August, and then the other 5% was evening of the 29th. And then on the 31st, we did the 250, 300 mils, and then yesterday on the 1st, we did update the 1 billion pluses, but only if there was a billion power differential between the 30th and the 1st. So from those past 2 days, as of yesterday, if there was a change of a billion or more power, plus or minus, then I updated this. Again, we will be doing a more massive update to this once we get to about Thursday. I'm going to try and basically, we might just stream on Thursday, and I'm just going to update everything that I can, as much as I can. So that way, once we get to Friday, we will be streaming the group announcements, and we'll have some updated data to reflect that as well. Now let's get to group predictions. So this I don't think is going to take too long, but as we get here, we have my number 1. Now, again, the way I did this is not necessarily going off just the absolute strongest, because you can already tell, like even 25 IL at 27 billion, right, could have swapped in here for BTX as an example. For me, I was going off kind of a number of other factors, not just limiting it to straight power. Again, we have a lot of other stuff that we're showing off this time around versus what we showed off last time. And oh yeah, there we go. That makes it easier, I think, for me on this. And I don't really need this column, I think. Oh, no, because I'm going to do total. I needed to do totals and stuff like that. So yeah, that's rough. I forgot to do that, like total 100 mil pluses and then total T5s, now that I'm thinking about it. Anyways, we'll add that in. But for now, just to make it easier to go through, we have the new columns that we talked about, which is, again, KD merits. That's basically merits accumulated from the kingdom last season. We have their M over P, or this is a PvP activity percentage, right? So it's just merits divided by power. And then this is, again, their percentage of merits to their power, right? So you can kind of see, how much PvP engagement the kingdom was producing last season. And then we have the 5M, 10, 15, 20M. These are million merits per player. So as an example, Echo had 178 players in their kingdom that accumulated at least 5 million merits worth of fighting. And then as the tail end example, they had 100 players that reached 20 million merits last season from PvP. So that's what that means. 60 to 300, this is just power in millions, right? So this is 60 million power, right? So the example here, Echo had 184 players at 60 million power or higher, and they have 6 players at 300 million power or higher, just to give you that breakdown. And then we have totals here for the amount of, again, each group that you can see. And then we did averages here for the PvP percentage that you would get from the group, right? And then merits and power. Now, for the most part, all these groups top down are in power order, but there might be 1 or 2 or a few here, right, that are plus or minus. So for me, when I'm going through this, I'm looking at, to be honest, power's nice, but I like to look a lot more at like merits, PvP activity percentage. I like to look at some of the higher numbers, like the 10, 15, and 20s here, on how many people are actually performing and showing up. And then kind of looking at like more around the 80 to 100 million plus range, just because it's more troops trained. And then seeing also how some of those matchups stack when we look at like the 150, 200 to 300 range too as well. So, and then I'll kind of look at power, right? Power to me is kind of a somewhat of a, maybe a starting point, But for me, it's not really the primary factor that I like to look at when we're thinking about it. It's trying to kind of find good median averages for the group. And at the same time, understanding that you can't just make one group absolutely perfect, because you also risk sacrificing the next group or any of the groups down the line, right? So you can potentially have this like negative snowball or negative ripple effect if you try to perfect or over perfect, if you will, one group, and then you sacrifice potentially others. Now, sometimes it just works out that way and the numbers are great. And sometimes you have to kind of think about the other groups as well. So that's kind of just how I like to look at it. With that in mind, let's go through these predictions pretty quick. So for the number one KvK group, again, we predicted, and again, there were some people on stream too as well that were giving us their feedback on who they thought. So I'll just say we for the sake of it, because again, we were doing this on stream. So we had Echo, EIS, Rage, BTX, WBA, NTS, right? That's what we were thinking could be the top group. They would come in at about 175 billion power and a 14.41% PvP engagement. There'd be 1,021 100 mil plus players. You got 34 300 mils. Then we have the number 2 KvK group that we were thinking, which could be 30 NA, WAO, and we'll just highlight this for there while we're doing it. WAO, FWY, A2G, ROG25IL. They would come in at 148 billion power, 14.46% PvP engagement. So again, still really good. They would have 1,117 T5 players there. 775 of those would be 100 mil pluses, and then 45 would be a 200 mil plus. Okay, next group. This would be the potential number 3 KvK group. We're thinking RFF, FG, NWE, Apex, 21SD, MFD. They'd come in about 133 billion power, 14.51% PvP engagement. We'd have 1,206 60 mil plus players. Then we'd have 539 100 mil plus players here. We would be looking at 12 200 mil plus. And now let's get over to the number 4 KvK group that we're thinking. So this one here, we have 118 billion power. This would be IWG, K211, NXW, HD, WER, LXV. They'd come in at 12.48% PvP engagement. They would have, again, 881 T5 players, 291 100 mil pluses there in the group total. And then we'd have 3 200 mil pluses. And I imagine that might end up getting low res time goes on. But the important bit here, and you'll see that reflected in the next group, right, is that even if you look at these numbers, right, this is really important to understand, is that you want to find similarities, right? Try and getting things as close as you can. If you notice here, they're all pretty close at the 150 range. And there's only a couple outliers at 200 and 300. But again, you look at 80s, 100s, the numbers are closer, more and more bunched together. Versus the next group, which you can clearly see from the columns, there's more activity on the 150 and 200. So that's why it's important to look at multiple stats in multiple areas and not just necessarily kind of honing or focusing in on one, as an example. Okay, then we get to potentially the number 5 group here, which we were thinking RAC, OMG, GG, TFS, BNR, and 3-3, right? They'd come in at 108 billion power, 14.42% PvP engagement. We'd have 975 players, 686 100 mil pluses, 26 200 mil pluses. All right. Next group, this would be KvK number 6 potentially. This would be DAD, TC, FSK, ED, and Lion, which is cool. Lion, FSK, maybe get another rivalry match going on. GEX, they would come in at 103 billion, about 104, 11.38% PvP activity. We'd have over 1,060 or 1,000 T5s. You'd have 370 100 mil pluses, and then 6 200 mil pluses for the group. Let's look at number 7 potentially. This could be OO, X, 14BS, RK3, WGL, IR. They would come in at about 91, almost 92 billion power. They'd have 13.5%. 55% PvP activity. We'd have 920 T5 players, 419 100 mil pluses. Okay, next group here is going to be number 8 potential projected KvK, which could be BB, SHPZ, O5DK, OR Seal, 262. And they would come in at about 93 billion power, 8.08% PvP activity. We'd have 877 60 mil pluses, 181 at 100 mil plus. Okay, number 9 KvK. We're thinking LOC, Fate, AG, SG97, GNR, and BK. Here, estimated 81.9, about 82 billion power, 7.83% PvP activity percentage. We'd have 724 T5s and then 210 100 mil pluses. As we get over here to the number 10, there's only a few more left after this. Number 10 projected KvK. Maybe could be 1UP, GRZ, BOM, -FU, AVIC, RNW. This could be about 74, almost 75 billion power, 10.35% PvP activity percentage. We'd have, where am I looking here? We'd have 671 T5 players, then 258 of those would be 100 mil pluses. If we look over here at potential number 11 KvK, we would be looking at 502 NXSC, Bear, VP22, VKG, CFRA. This would be about 75, almost 76 billion power. They'd come in about 7.61% PvP activity percentage, and then we'd have 552 T5s, 137 100 mil pluses. Next group would be number 12. Here we'd have I, WTF, SNIX, FA, S2AK, and D&D. They'd come in at about 62 billion power, 12.01% PvP activity percentage. They'd have 559 T5s in the group, 289 of those 100 mil pluses. And then we get to, here we go, last two. So we'd have number 13 KvK is going to be 87, 44, 316, 173, 80, 394. 64 billion power, 9.83% PvP activity percentage. We'd have 556 T5s, 163 of those would be 100 mil pluses. And then the last predicted group we think could be one LAW, ASC, CAN, PX, HTF, KOV. And there was a couple other alliances too, as well. We could have done a couple more groups, but we were pretty tired at this point, so we stopped at 14. But this group would have been about 56 billion power, 1.64% PvP activity percentage. And we'd have 561 T5 players and 191 100 mil pluses. So yeah, and that basically rounds us out for the groups on what we think. Again, I'd love to hear from you guys. Again, do you potentially like some of the groups? Do you like all the groups? What changes would you make maybe to some of the groups? Maybe who else do you really want to see going up against each other that you just think would be awesome, and maybe something that you would be really interested in watching that KvK if they had matched up certain teams against others? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. That's it for me. As always, until next time, we'll catch you later.